And then this is where the whole English choice started to crack. Start embracing the fact that you will need to localize the product at some point.
Welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast, where experts discuss international content management, product localization, and global expansion. I'm Caterina from Undertow. We create and manage localization programs for B2B SaaS companies so they can grow globally. Today, our founder, Nicola Calabrese, will be talking with Gilles Bertaux, CEO and co-founder of Livestorm, a video engagement platform. In this episode, Gilles shares the remarkable story of how Livestorm grew from an early-stage startup into an 8-figure company with global footprint. He dives into the company's early decisions around language strategy, the unexpected growth of their international customer base, and the localization tactics that they use to scale. From embracing English as a default to leveraging AI and customer-led translations, Gilles offers a candid look at the highs and lows of expanding internationally, plus his takes on what SaaS founders should really consider before going global. So, let's dive in.
Hi, Gilles, and welcome to the Multilingual Content Podcast. How are you today?
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
And today we're going to talk about Livestorm international journey when you expanded into different markets. But before we jump right into that, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit and tell us about your journey?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Gilles Bertaux. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Livestorm. I've been doing that for the past 9 years. So it's been a while. I spent most of my 20s and most of my 30s now doing that. And I straight out of college. So I guess this is my first job. And we've grown from a final exam project in college up to a more than 8-figure deal ARR type of company with more than 100 people. And we went through all different phases, like almost bootstrap, rapid growth during COVID, where we grew by 8x in less than a year, and now reaching profitability and playing a long-term game. So it's been a long journey with ups and downs, but it's been a really good learning path for me.
Well, it sounds like a hell of a first job, to be honest. It's a quite interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
As I said, today I would like to talk about the Livestorm international journey. So can you tell us a little bit about how it was, what kind of milestones you went through, different phases maybe you went through?
Yeah, I think the first thing is we wanted to stay super small. And it is a very candid first statement back in the days, but actually that drove a lot of decisions that impacted how internationalization will be dealt with. So we wanted to stay small, meaning that we will have a self-service approach, no sales, have some sort of organic growth going on. Also, we wanted to reach as many people as possible, meaning that we will organically start with English as it is the most common language after Chinese, but in the Western world, at least, this is the most common language. And then we would just expand from there. And since we were a French company and we had some customers in French, obviously we had a little bit of French in there. But the baseline was, let's talk to the most people with the less effort possible. And that drove the English choice. So basically what it meant is the product was in English, the website was in English, marketing was in English, even communications internally was in English, with this thing in mind, even though we were French, right? So with this thing in mind, we wanted to have a operation communications that were going to be scalable and be able to be adapted, and the knowledge will be able to be ingested by anyone that will join the company in the future. So that choice of English really impacted us at the very beginning. And the funny thing is, that was back in 2016 or 2017-ish, right? And then the company grew and we started raising a seed round and a Series A back in 2019. But within that time frame, what was really interesting is that 80% of the customer base was actually from outside of France, and most of them in North America. And I think part of the reason why is people did not see us as a French company. And that was until COVID, where we got a lot of PR. Everybody thought we were actually an American company because of all the communications, the English, and the whole globalization type of mindset that we had. And yeah, so I think that was actually, I think looking back, a pretty good move because it kind of laid out the ground for a global company. We can sell the product wherever. We don't have any localization. I think that's also part of the tiny decisions at the beginning is we wanted to build a product that will not be specifically tied to local regulations. So we're not a payment system, for example. We're not a credit card or company or whatever. Therefore, we can sell the product wherever or almost wherever. And that also impacted the choice of English and internalization and whatnot. So yeah, and then after COVID, well, during COVID, we got a lot of PR. As I said, we went from 1.5 million AR to 8 million in the same year. And we got like a shit ton of coverage and everything. And then people started realizing that we were actually a French company. And we started playing with this image because we wanted to provide some sort of alternative to the big guys, more like a European type of thing. So we kind of surfed this wave. And out of a sudden, the customer base started to shift. So we saw obviously a lot of French company. Now actually France is about 30 to 40% of the revenue that we make. So huge increase there. With that came also more customers, more diverse, more bigger customers. And then this is where the whole English choice started to crack. Because with bigger customers, with more specific countries, and that started to raise more exceptions and demand and requests. And then, yeah, you're in this thing where you cannot say no to everyone. And you need to start embracing the fact that you will need to localize the product at some point. So moving away from self-service, dealing with enterprise, starting to think about certain countries more specifically like Germany or even southern countries that don't speak English so well, or countries that don't want to speak English like Germany. Yeah, this is where localization started to become a bigger problem. And this is where we started like dealing with it. Essentially.
And what were some of the initial strategy you decided to implement for when you decided to expand internationally, include new languages?
Yeah. So again, I guess the pattern here is that we're super lazy, but because that was another lazy strategy, we wanted to have something that will not take as much resources as possible, but still scale very, very well and be really accurate in terms of how it would respond to the need of the customer. So what we thought very candidly is to say, okay, the best person to localize the product for the customer, well, is the customer. So what we did is we said to, I don't know, if the customer was based in Germany or based in the Nordics or whatever, we'd just say, hey, we can open up our translation tool. We give you an access. Here it works. And if you're willing to have someone in your team do the translation specifically on Livestorm for your use case, feel free to do it. I know it's a lot of time spent for you, so we'll deduct that from your Livestorm invoice, give you a discount or whatever. And then, so it doesn't cost you more money. And at the end of the day, you're happy because you have the right translation. And I think that was a pretty good move because actually, surprisingly, a lot of customers said yes. And in less than a year or something, we had about like 14, even more like different languages on the dashboard. So basically the language experience on Livestorm is 3 separate things. We have all the front window. So the whole website, marketing, ebooks, whatnot. You have the product experience. So as a user, when you enter the product, what languages are available. And then you have the attendee experience, the people attending a webinar, because we're a webinar software, right? So the attendee that joins a customer webinar, then they need to have, landing pages, emails, Livestorm room with the live stream and everything in their language. That last part is what we translated in priority. And this is what the customer wanted. They wanted to have emails in Polish or room in Polish, blah, 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 everything translated in that language. So they did that. And yeah, in a year, we had about like 14, even more different languages just on that dashboard. So basically the internal user part of Livestorm was more difficult, not because a lot of different problematics that we need to be mindful of, a lot of glossaries that needs to be also communicated, and also a lot of different strings everywhere. And it's a lot more work to do on the customer side. So we did that ourselves using freelancer and also internal stakeholders that were more used to the language. So we went with French, English, but then Spanish, and more recently German. But German is a slightly different way on how we did it. And for the front window, basically marketing material, we just stayed with English and French at first, and we just recently started to do something else and trying to localize. But the core area for us the core strategy was to say, where does it matter the most to translate the product? And for us, it was the customer experience and therefore the attendee experience. So we started with that and we let them do the work. And yeah, I guess we're going to talk about AI, but I think AI changed a lot of different things on how we process.
Oh yeah,
now.
That's coming. That's questions on AI are definitely coming. Yeah. Before we move to that, I was curious, so yeah, it makes absolute sense what you said, like differentiating. Well, because you have what you call like the front window. So it'll be the marketing. It's for, let's say, the people making the buying decisions. So they're not necessarily the same, but most of the time they're not the end user, like in the sense attendees. So that makes sense differentiating that. Absolutely. And I was wondering, what if you were now that you've done all the journey, if you were to go back and do something different, what would you change? What would you do differently that you've done before?
Honestly, I don't think I would change much. I think the way we approached language at the very beginning was the right one. I would do it pretty much the same way again. I would probably be even more strict about French, for example. French has been, to be honest, it's been a legacy on the way we deal with, for example, like emailing, automated emailing that we do on the marketing side. We always had to have conditions to match English and French. Website also a lot of time spent on basically translating every single page on French and English. So I guess I would be more strict on that and just start with English for sure. And I would approach a translation of the product probably the latest as possible until it really makes sense. Also, I will probably aim for, unless, because the thing is, we kind of say yes to everyone whenever someone had a request for a language, and then we just open up the translation tool and then they will do it. I guess I will be more mindful of the languages we do first. I will start with the hardest and the more specific, because those are the ones that will basically impact you on the long run when you have legacy. So I have 2 examples for that. Typically, German is a good example because the words are longer. They tend to break your design. They tend to break everything. So this is something to be mindful of in a product from the get-go. Also, everything that is RTL, so right to the left, is also something to be very mindful of. So typically Hebrew, Arabic, all those languages you need to be very careful with. I wouldn't probably not do them first, but at least prepare the product to accommodate those for sure from the get-go. So to make sure we can ingest those requests more easily. And the last bit I will do is trying to have 2 different, very precise landscapes of who the customer of a customer is. So who is using the final product at the end and who they come and where they come from. So for us, it's the attendees. So have some sort of mapping of the countries where the most attendees are and just base our decision on that. I think it will be less pollution and more focus, and also do the same with our customer base. If we have 80% of English-speaking countries, we don't need to translate the product until a certain country start to reach 15 or 20% more, or maybe in ARR. So make sure the value is also close to that. And I would have a more data approach. A lot of the things we did was opportunistic type of guesses. Kind of worked well in the end, but I feel we could have been more focused and more fast and more quick on our feet.
Because I was wondering, if you're handing to your customers the localization of the product or other part of the experience, was it still like your company deciding from which part to start first or what to do first, or would they do it as they preferred? Just to understand
No,
that.
that's the thing. We were really very candid. We said, okay, you want to become a customer of Livestorm, you need to think translated in Nordic. You're going to pay us $100 a month. Yeah, sure. Let's use the translation tool. I feel that we were very open to say yes because we wanted to grow as fast as possible, etc., etc. But I feel we should have been more mindful of the legacy that we were creating, because all those languages done by customer A, if there are a monthly customer that pays you $100, it is very likely that 5 years from now that customer is no longer using you, and therefore who is going to maintain that specific language they created, right? So I would have a more tied to the revenue approach, like a big customer that pays us a lot, that is going to be committed for 1, 2, 3 years. Yes, of course. Let's close them. Let's open our tool and let them do the work, etc., or do it for them. Yeah, a more efficient approach would have been better.
And before, you mentioned like you changed a little bit your approach. You started hiring salespeople as well, right? At some point.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
like,
exactly.
What was your approach like when deciding it's a new market? What was your approach to deciding whether or how many people to hire or what kind of people to hire?
Yeah. So we always went with English first. So we don't sell Livestorm on specific countries. We just customers that come from pretty much everywhere. Most of them in Europe, a little bit roughly 20% from North America. And then you have small pockets in South America and Southeast Asia. But it's basically, let's say the Western world is using Livestorm. So we don't have offices in those countries, meaning we don't have any local presence. But we realize that certain countries need some sort of cultural bond with us. So Southern Europe, Italy, Spain, France, they need someone that speaks the language because they also don't speak very well the English. And also they have probably a specific way of doing business and approaching business. So they need someone that is closer culturally to them. Germany is also the typical example. They need someone who speaks German that, is very tied to conformity, etc. So we knew from the get-go that we would need people that are close culturally to those people. They need to speak the language. They need to be either native from those countries or spend a fair amount of time in those countries to understand how to speak to them and how to do business with them. And then after, wherever they were staying or living was pretty much irrelevant. So we could, for example, the person in charge of the DACH country, so DACH region, so Germany and surroundings, is actually living in Biarritz, but he lives in France, but himself is German, speaks German, and he knows the region by heart, and he speaks English very well, and also he's able to have some interaction in French if needed. So we're looking for cultural jack of all trades, essentially, to address as much as possible. So again, we have this pattern of looking for kind of broad set of skills, jack of all trades, and making sure we can address as much with as little as possible.
And you mentioned like they can work remotely. Is Livestorm in general, everybody is remote, right?
Yes, we're all remote. Yeah.
I guess that.
And also, being remote probably also kind of emphasized the company on relying on English and everything. I spend most of my day speaking English, even though I'm French, and writing in English and everything. So I guess English has become my second language. And I feel that for most of us, it's been the case, unless your team is 100% French, etc., which it's really rarely the case, unless you work in a finance team, for example, because since the company is French, finance is French law, so French people. So less cultural mix-up. But otherwise, I think English has become very intricated into Livestorm.
And now, talking about the AI, so the rise of AI and the continuous improvements that it's bringing, how do you see things changing when it relates to international expansion and localization?
I feel that, so if we go back to the different categories of translation, we have marketing content, platform content, and customer facing content. The last bit is something we already scale using manual work done by our customers, but tomorrow we can actually rely on AI to do it. And then the customers will just need to approve at least, or maybe have a say on what has been produced for them. Maybe give them the tools to input some glossaries and stuff that are actually very specific to them to make sure the translation is even more accurate to their use case. So I feel that AI will drive translation to become something as part of a customization feature, not just internationalization, but also very tied to a customization feature, because it will reflect exactly what the business is all about, because you have the glossaries and the context and everything else, right? So that's one. Also, still on that part, I think that for us specifically, one thing that was very, very hard to translate or to produce the live content. So the speech, the voice, very hard to translate on real time. The things we used to have was very, very shitty. And since 2 years ago, or even a year ago, all of a sudden, live translation are actually much better. In our own language, they're almost perfect. And if you need to translate that in real time, there is a slight delay, but the delay is very, very short. And now it is actually very accurate. The next step of that will be dubbing and have an actual voiceover that speaks a different language if you don't speak in French or English.
Sorry to interrupt your listening, but do you want to grow your B2B SaaS in international markets? Because every country is different, and what users value in one market doesn't necessarily matter in another one. At Undertow, we help B2B SaaS companies like yours succeed in their international expansion. We create customized localization strategies that address the unique challenges of each market. In this way, you can effectively attract, engage, and convert customers worldwide. Visit undertowlanguages.com to find out more. And now back to the show. Just to understand better what you're referring here, it's like you mean during a webinar for people who don't speak, let's say, English, they can follow with subtitle in their own language. And then the next step would be they get a voiceover in that language. Okay.
Exactly. What we have now is basically live captioning. So basically you speak English, you have subtitles in English. The next step of that we're working this summer is you speak English and a translation with the subtitles will be in Italian or Spanish. And the last step of that will be to actually have a voiceover that goes on top of your voice, just like interpretation, but in a different language. So AI will, for product like ours, basically remove the entire barriers of accessibility in terms of language. So that's going to be very interesting. So yeah, as I said, it's becoming more and more of a feature, and that's really cool. On the second bucket, which is the platform itself and what users are doing, let's say dashboard and admin and everything. Right now, what's cool is that the expectation of accuracy is actually much lower than everything that is customer facing, of course, because a user doesn't care. It is slightly not the right button slightly not the right CTA, but the customer will care if their customer is actually facing a content that is badly translated and will reflect bad on them. So what's cool is now we can open the translation tool of the dashboard at admin to an AI, and it will just like do a batch translation of every string. Maybe it will be 80% accurate, but then we can do some sort of second pass on top of it, and it will ease up the work. Exactly what we did for German. German was the latest language introduced on the admin facing stuff, and it took us like a week or maybe 2 weeks to do it. Just like most of the work, 80% of the work done in 1 week, and then it's just like proofreading, and that was it. So very cool. And for marketing content, it's the same. German was the latest language we released on the website, and now everything content-wise produced in German is 100% handled by AI. So every time we have a important page, it is automatically translated in German. Same goes for the blog. And then we just have a couple of freelancer that goes on top of it on the background just to make sure it is authentic, and they proofread it, and that's it. So yeah, a lot of time spared, and I know it's definitely a new era for translation.
Yeah, I mean, it can definitely free up some resources as well. I was thinking one of the things that sometimes there's never time for, they could be either testing the product, like actually getting somebody to test the product in language, because sometimes there's no time or money for that. And even opening up new markets that before where like, it's not worth it to enter there. And now with these tools, you can enter those markets because it can make more economic sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree totally. The way we approached German was exactly the same, because back in 2021, when we released, we tried entering the Spanish market more specifically. So we did everything by hand. We had a freelancer go over whatnot pages on the website, translated in Spanish, and hope for the best, right? It cost us a lot of money, and the results were actually very bad. So we ditched all that. So basically money lost. And for German, we changed approach. So basically we said, okay, we're going to pick the top 20 pages, the one that drive the most traffic. We're going to focus just on those. And we're going to have the AI translated. And we're going to launch the new domain. And that's it. That's the only thing we're going to do. So very little resource involved, and see what happens. And as soon as we started seeing traffic picking up, some conversions directly coming from the specific part of the website. We started increasing the number of pages and so on until SEO started to pick in really, really fast. And then now it is an official language. But starting small, poking stuff with AI, and then involving humans to the very last stage until you're almost sure that the language is going to be a driver of revenue, of traffic, then do it. But wait for the very last moment to involve humans in the process, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we usually always recommend what we call to put together a minimum viable experience. So not to do when you go in a new market, you have maybe the whole website is too much or the whole app center, there's hundreds of articles there. And some of the article, maybe they have just a couple of visits. It doesn't make sense to do all of it. So just identify at each step of the journey from when they get to know to convert and they start using, what's the minimum you need to have in place. That's like music to me. Yeah, it makes absolutely sense.
It's really cool. And the team even built a tool on top of that. So basically we had this CMS, the website is on CMS, but we didn't have any specific tools for translating the website and the content of it and just doing so those with the new language. So our website engineer, he built this crazy internal app that basically pulls all the data, all the content from the CMS. You tell the content list, you have a column that says, okay, it is translated in that language. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. You can just select, do a batch translation of all that using a whatever OpenAI or whatever model you want to use. And then when the translation is complete, just like pushes everything back into the CMS. So we could have relied on a tool, but again, since we wanted to use a POC and something that goes fast and matches exactly what we need, was actually faster to do it ourselves. And because we could also include all the different type of context and glossary and everything that was the substance of Livestorm. So yeah.
And if you were to give like an advice to a SaaS founder that is thinking about expanding internationally, what kind of advice, apart from what you already said, which is quite a lot, what kind of advice would you like, some actionable thing they can do like to begin with?
I think the first thing is 50% of the job is create some sort of cultural bond, I guess. You have to have some sort of cultural bridge in place, meaning either you have people that speak the language or you speak the language yourself and you know how those people do business. So you have people in-house that know how those people do business. Poke the bear. So you try to build some sort of top level content type of things, trying to make sure if there is an appetite for your product in that specific country. So maybe it's SEO, maybe it's a bit of traffic, maybe it's a bit of outbound, I don't know, but poke the bear and see if something happens there. Once you have this cultural bridge, that there is some sort of appetite or signals of appetite, if also you have existing customer that is within the region, etc., and you have an existing, so those are all type of signals that will tell you that maybe it is a good idea to start investing. And then you have a second phase, which is, does your product need to be on the ground? Does your team need to be on the ground because it is very specific, because maybe there is a regulatory environment that compels you to be there? And if so, obviously you need to go there and you need to open up offices and actually spend time there yourself. Or the product can be sold from anywhere, and then you just have to basically scale everything that you just did in terms of translation, cultural, etc., etc. I guess there are specific markets where, I guess there is one exception to that, where you need to be there, even though your product can be sold anywhere, and we actually pay the price of it. So I know it. It's actually the US. I don't think you can strive in the US if you're not there. It used to be some sort of Deus ex machina rule that kind of everyone was saying that you need to be there, but actually for once I think it is true, to be very honest. I mean, we do have customers there, but are we the biggest player in the US? Absolutely not. And we used to have a big team in the US, even a head of sales in the US, and about 10 people almost, and it didn't work, because it was almost a different company within the company, and they had this own way of doing things. They had their own process. They were not respecting the processes, or even they didn't know the information well. It was not circulating well also. So it's not their fault. It's probably ours, because we were not there. We were not acculturating them. Yeah. Basically like blending them into the company so well. And yeah, so I guess for the US, you need to be there. We still have some people in the US, but it's a small team, so it's easier to manage. It's easier to pass on knowledge and onboard them into the company. So yeah, if your plan is to strive in the US, is your main market there, if you think that you need to be number one, you need to be there, then you have to go to the US. I think that's probably one of the only exceptions that, kind of contradict everything I've said.
So maybe I'm thinking now, what we discussed with AI as well, making lowering the barrier of entry for language wise, maybe looking around in Europe first. If you're a European SaaS, might make sense. Might be easier now to start with Europe and then think about US, because you're not the first time telling me that it's very tough in the US because it's a big market, very competitive, especially in some categories. It's quite competitive. You need to have a team there on the place. Well, maybe in Europe, you can do it remotely. You don't necessarily to be on the ground in every single country.
Yeah, I think AI is going to be much more the advantage of American company that want to go into Europe, because there are many different languages in Europe, or cultural differences and whatnot, and having agent sales or whatever doing the work, or even marketing content agent doing the work of translating your product, translating your image, and communicating and pitching. It's going to be much easier for American company to go in Europe. I think for us, European, all we have is just you're going to speak English to Canadian people and American people. It doesn't change much of what we're already doing. So I guess for European companies entering North America, it's not a language challenge. It's a culture challenge, essentially, even more a company culture challenge, and more of a strategy, position and choice to make, which goes beyond just sake of translation.
Yeah, I agree. That's what I mean. It's not the barrier. The language English is the same that you can use, let's say, in the UK, but it's completely different market and a big one, as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Is there anything else that I should have asked you about this topic that maybe we didn't discuss before we wrap up?
No, but since you're actually in this market, I would like to know what you think about what are the trends you see as an expert on translation in general, and on how AI is changing what you guys do on day to day, what a customer are asking. And that would be super interesting.
What I see, the major trends is absolutely AI is changing a lot in some way. Some of the things that really similar to AI was already within the industry. We were already using some tools machine translation got pretty good around 2017 compared to before. And that was already a big break. A lot of automated workflow were already implemented. This is just a big acceleration because now it got to, let's say, the mainstream. With AI, basically everybody knows what it is or what it does, at least at some level. So that's something that generated more expectation of using that in the workflows. So for us, it's more and more figuring out how to, because I do agree that in a lot of cases, it helps quite a lot. And the thing you said, it brings you 80% of the way there. But the last 20%, you need humans, especially for very sensitive content. So I think it's very important to understand better, to have a better segmentation of the content, understand different workflows for different kind of content. Some content can be just automatically translated. Some other need special care. So to differentiate that and have different workflows and strategies around that and processes. And the other trend is with AI being an add-on to a lot of platforms, you start having the content, let's say the translated content, spread around different platforms. And that makes it challenging to keep the consistency. For example, glossary, not having a centralized glossary. The way we usually manage it with localization, we have a central platform that connects to everything else. So you can keep all the translation memories, the databases of previously done translation, which can be fed as a reference to the AI to translate better. And the glossaries can be fed as well. So that's the idea, to keeping a central source of truth with the up-to-date reference material, which are most definitely kept up to date by humans with the help of AI. But
it's very cool. Basically, the translation platform will kind of evolve towards being context platform almost. They will basically centralize all the different strings from different areas, and that's just context, even more context for an AI to feed on, right? You will integrate maybe static files as well, just to have more context, meaning that translation will be an output to a knowledge that will be centralized. And I think you're right. I think we need to have centralized knowledge at some point, because otherwise it's going to be a shit show, and going to have that translation that are really not consistent with legacy of knowledges and stuff like that. And the other thing I'm wondering is also how much SEO will be impacted. I feel that the more AI translation we have specifically on marketing content, the more we're going to be seeing company being striked by Googlebot or whatever because it is not authentic content, whatever. So I guess the SEO implications of translation in those platforms will be probably more and more something customers will care about. So it's interesting because all of a sudden a platform like yours become centralized source of truth and knowledge, which was definitely not what it was intended for at the beginning. And also it's becoming more and more a marketing tool for SEO because you have to be mindful of SEO as well. And if someone starts translating an entire website, of thousands and thousands of pages in Spanish and the translation are shit or not authentic, basically that customer is going to get striked and they're going to churn because you're going to say, hey, translation is shit, it's not authentic. But dude, you just translated 1,000 pages. Obviously, you need to have some sort of best practices there. So yeah, I think it's
and the glossary, like the terminology consistency is gonna be bigger and bigger because especially when it comes to software, it can be really confusing for the end user if they see the same feature being called like 3-4 different ways across the content. They can get really confused. Like, is it still the same feature or is it a different one? And if you have obviously constant updates to the product, you have to make sure like also how do you go through, let's say, make sure that all the mentions of the previous, let's say, version of the feature that was called. Let's say you have something that was like I don't know, customer service robot, and now it's like a AI agent. And you have to change it. How do you make sure that throughout the whole experience, they're not gonna pop up in the language, in some languages you don't still have like some version of the customer service robot. Right, so that kind of things like is the main, not only the launch, but also like the maintenance and the actual end experience for the users and customers. So they get like something all knit together, and everybody having access to AI, it's gonna be easier to do something like bare minimum. But people are going to start noticing when there's companies like doing an extra effort that is going to be like an extra effort, but they're going to see like, so the company care because they didn't just ingest it in an AI engine and get me whatever came out of it. They made sure that like the instructions or the platform, it's for me in my language. So they thought about me. I think it's going to be like a competitive advantage among companies, especially when things get like very heated and competitive. Yeah.
And do you feel that there will be going to be some sort of proofreading agent that will basically go like reverse engineer translation and say, okay, this is obviously made by AI, so I'm just going to, as an AI, change a little bit the content and make it more human and have some sort of kind of, AI machine that's trying to imitate human tone and voice to make sure translations be authentic?
There are already agents like that check like you can have like a 2-step process with AI before it reaches human. So you get a first, let's say, step. They do the first layer with specific prompt with the instructions. They look at all the reference that they have for context, understanding, okay, so this is let's say the user interface for this kind of application. And these are the terms that you should adhere to, the glossary terms. And then there's a second layer that has basically the same reference material, but different instruction, like making sure, let's say, for example, you say, make sure that it reads nice, or they actually follow the terminology, because with AI, it's still like a black box. You do like, you give the same input and you don't necessarily get the same output twice. Even if you change the temperature and make it like as stable as possible, you might still get different. And they might say, yeah, I definitely follow the terminology, but they're like, I guess, in a way, they're very similar to humans. So they don't always follow all the instruction to the point. So, which I would say
they don't like to be wrong.
It's a bit surprising, and then you say, but actually you didn't. Oh yeah, you're right. Sorry, and they fix it. So in some way, like they're very similar to humans, I gotta say, which is a bit surprising, I think. But it's because I guess they imitate. So that's
And what about freelancers? We talked about having humans do the proofreading, and I feel that there's a huge portion of the market that is, just freelancer doing translation work, etc. So obviously there is a world where that specific job is at risk, or maybe it will transition or migrate to some sort of proofreading type of job and not just generating content.
In some way, it has already changed in the sense that there's already like a lot of work is like proofreading, editing, the ones coming out from the AI. And the other thing is the reference materials, like the context for the AI, the glossaries, making sure that the previous, like if you have an update, somebody actually make sure that term is updated literally across the whole experience. You can automate it to some point, but you will still want somebody to validate those kind of things. So it's changing. It's true that some of the content, the amount of work is in somehow it's going to shrink in volume and change in nature. So that it's still like changing. Not 100% sure how it's going to go back. But the way I see it going, like it's changing the way they work. and it's going to be more crucial like for people to be very specialized about a specific niche, because they can be like the expert for that niche and making sure like this is how people in this country call this kind of thing. So that's going to make a big difference.
Like legal, for example, I guess.
Yeah. But even like if you think like stuff like HR, you have a HR platform and you are into, I don't know, let's say you're into the Netherlands, and somebody says like in Dutch, that's how this thing is called in HR environment. So that's going to make a big difference, because even AI, really depending on the amount of data they have on specific topic, it can be really uneven, the results. And what I'm curious as well is the Asian languages, because they tended to fare very bad with the automatic translation before. It's better now with AI. So that's something as well that I'm looking for, like how it works. Like Chinese, I know they have their own, in China, they develop their own models. So they're more geared towards that. But other Asian languages like Korean, Japanese, and all the Southeast Asia, those are like still like, they're not as good as, let's say, Spanish or Italian in automated translation.
Actually, we have, speaking of using different languages, we have a best practice internally, but maybe that's a myth, but it's something that we kind of saw empirically, is whenever we want to translate in a language that is very far from ours in terms of, anthropologically speaking. So, for example, if we go from French to Russian, for example, the roots of those languages are very far away. Same goes for English and, well, a little bit less with English because it is a German language. But basically, the best practice that we have is we try to ask for a translation in Russian by giving two contexts at once. So one translation in French, one translation in English. This way we have two separate languages with two different roots in terms of culture, German, Latin language. And then we send that to an AI. And then with the nuances of context, the translation and Russian translation is actually much more accurate than just using one.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Yeah, you can give other languages for context. It's a similar way as well. Like even like similar languages can help, especially when there's some like creative solution to find. That's also humans do that. Like, for example, if you have to translate the sentence, say, okay, you want to translate it into French, but you can read like Spanish, Italian, and German. You have a look at those and they can give you an idea, like maybe how to tackle that. So AI, I think it might work similar way. So
it's interesting because then it's like a language archaeology where you're trying to reverse that to match the language that is closer than the one that you're trying to do initially. But it's really cool.
Yeah. And so it was a really interesting conversation. And
yes, it was.
Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us today. The Multilingual Content Podcast is powered by Undertow. We help B2B SaaS companies grow in any language. Get in touch if you want to know more. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episode. If you want to support us, remember to give 5 stars to the podcast. See you next time.